Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's show. Tonight is our first tips and techniques show, specific to going over one thing and explaining it in a little more detail than we usually do. We're talking about tilt-shift lenses tonight. It's our 159th episode of the Daytripper Photo Show, and we have our good friend Don Komarechka on tonight as a guest. Don, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Oh, you're welcome, Brian. This is such a fun topic too. It's one that you've chosen one of the few topics that I have yet to really sink my teeth into and explore to the degree where I know there's tons of creative potential. And so you'll see, I guess, some of the tip of the iceberg stuff that I have in mind.
Cool, awesome.
Cool.
Looking forward to getting to that. Thank you again for being on the show. I know you're a busy guy. You told us earlier you had a pretty crazy day already today. So for you to take the time and be here tonight, it's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You guys always make it worthwhile. It's fun.
Ah, now you're just inflating our egos.
Shock.
And with us, as usual, is Gabriel Bousquet. Good day, sir.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, ça va?
I don't know what that means.
Okay, good. Nice to have you here. And anything crazy happened to you this week?
No, it's been a pretty uneventful week. Just the whole family getting over our 30 years of coffee-ness. So the whole family's had this cough/congestion thing going on for about the last 3 weeks. So yeah, getting over that. Besides that, just working and working out and all that fun stuff.
You are absolutely the sickest healthy guy I've ever known.
At least I have a label.
And Phil, welcome back again this week. I see you've done lots of unpacking behind you.
Oh, I've done tons. I moved the computer a little bit so you can't see the rest of the boxes. So technically they're not there.
It's all about perspective, isn't it, Phil? It's all about perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, see that segue I just did there? Perspective.
I like it. It's only a good segue if you point it out.
Yeah. That's true. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. The tilt-shift lens creates a very unique perspective in our photos, and we're going to talk about that. First, just going to say hello to Mark Flinders and to Joseph Leduc. Joe, you put a little pressure on us there. You just said, "Hello, guys, entertain me." Now there's pressure. That's not a good little sound effect. That's kind of... All right. Well, as we've mentioned, we're splitting up our shows into 3 separate concepts. The reason for this is because we generally tend to banter sometimes, and we're trying to control this. So one of the rules of our new show is if I catch one of our crew talking for more than 2 minutes, I'm going to do the old familiar gong sound, and everybody will remember that, oh, wait a minute, we have a deadline to end the show tonight, and hopefully we'll rein back in and get back into the topics. So we've split it up into 3 shows. We have the Photo Challenge Review, which we did last week. We have the T&T show, which is our tips and techniques show, which we're doing right now. And, of course, next week will be our first banter show, also known as the Squirrel Show. That's the show where we're going to get into a lot of current events and new products and tips, and not tips, but things that are going on in the industry at that time, and kind of give ourselves permission to talk a little bit more and squirrel a little bit more, which we're kind of known for. So we can embrace it then, but for now, let's get to the show. I'm really hoping that splitting up these shows is going to give us a little bit more of, I don't know, just digestible information instead of just a bunch of talk. So, I know I just started talking again instead of after I said I would stop. But
Play the gong sound.
yes.
The
gong. So, okay. So first Q&A. Jennifer Newberry's watching. She says, "Where's Dixie? Is Dixie here? Did I miss Dixie?" No, you didn't miss Dixie, but if I'm not careful, she's going to attack me in just about a half a second. You see the look in her eye? This is the attack look. Okay, you can go now, Dixie.
It's a look of anger.
Yeah, she's good at that. Jerry Kelly says hello, and Ron Gray, hello, both of you guys. Thank you for watching tonight. Haley, thank you for watching, and of course Sheila is watching. Wow, lots of people are watching. Andrew's watching. Good evening. Gabriel, Philip, and Don. Look at that. People include you in that, Don. Isn't that nice? We have such friendly viewers. I love it. All right. 2 minutes is up. Now we're going to get to the rest of the show. The survey is up. Just want to remind everybody, the survey is still on the Daytripper Photo community. If you're interested in giving us some insight, letting us know what you do and don't like about our shows, please go to Daytripper Photo on Google+ and fill out our survey for us. Join the community if you haven't already. That would be a lot of fun. And if you like what we're doing with the show, please click like, subscribe, share it with your friends, tell the world we're doing it because we have a great time. We're almost at 160 shows now, almost over 3.5 years. It's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoy doing it, and hopefully you guys enjoy watching it. But don't forget, like a lot of you already haven't, please remember to join in the Q&A if you have any questions or tips to add to our conversation, because it is a community show, and the more you guys contribute, the more it becomes that. It's a big community environment. So keep it up, guys. Keep on saying hello. Jennifer is squealing like she's extremely happy now that she's seen Dixie. That's great. All right, cool. Let's move along. All right, so tilt shift lenses. Let's get to the meat and potatoes. Potatoes. Who wrote potatoes? I'm like Brick from that show. I just repeat everything I read.
Go F yourself, San Diego.
Let's get into what is a tilt shift. I think that's the first thing we need to talk about. And before we get into maybe a bit of a discussion about it, let me just show. I brought a few samples home for me from work today. Luckily, working at Henry's in Newmarket, occasionally I get to borrow some equipment, and we have some nice used lenses in stock right now. We have a Nikon. There you go, Nikon 85mm. That's an f2.8, and we have the Canon. I believe this is the 24mm. Yep, the TSE 24mm. And we also have a 17mm at the store, but I didn't bring that one with me. I didn't need to bring everything. I just want to show how these things work. So first of all, let's just go over quickly what these look like. There's a little release button here, and of course you have the actual dial over here where if you turn it, you are changing the angle of your lens. This is what makes these lenses called tilt shift. They literally can tilt in different directions. There's one, and if I turn this to the side over here, I can also, I think this is the lock on this side, yes it is, on this, I can change this position as well. So it gives you a lot of control over the planes. Now, Don, maybe you can chime in. You've got a prop beside you there. Explain what you've got there.
Well, this kind of brings into the history of photography, and I think that it's helpful to understand what a tilt-shift lens is, what it isn't, and why a regular lens that we currently use in most of our cameras doesn't have this feature. Photography, for the most part today, tries to mimic human vision as best as possible. And so we see whatever is sort of at one specific point. If I'm looking at my hand, then everything behind my hand will become out of focus, and everything that would be in front of it, if there was anything, would also become out of focus. That's because the focal plane runs parallel to the retina on my eye. Much as in a camera, the focal plane, what's in focus, runs parallel to the sensor. But you can change that. It doesn't have to run parallel to the sensor. And so what I have here, this is a large format camera. This is an Arca Swiss 4x5 camera from the mid-90s. And in large format photography, in older areas of photography, you know, when they had very narrow depth of field, or they needed to have a bit more fine-tuned technical and mechanical control over the camera, you would have a lot of those knobs and dials that you just pointed out on a modern lens. Like, I can tilt this. Like, the default position for this should be straight across, right? So let me take off the cape. Yeah, my camera has a cape.
It's a Batman camera.
So this has bellows, and of course, as bellows extend further out, then you can focus closer. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about the ability to shift the lens independently from the actual film plane that would have been at the back, and that is the tilt mechanism that is built into all tilt shift lenses. And I can move it side to side. I can press on it and move it forward and back as well, and any combination therein, which will allow me to change the focal plane, so that instead of having it run in the standard way that we normally see the world, you would then have the ability to have sort of a narrow band of focus, maybe running straight through the scene, and have the top and bottom out of focus, or maybe all the way straight across the middle of the frame, up and down, and have the sides completely out of focus based on your aperture. So there's a lot of creative potential that can happen in the field when you're dealing with this kind of technology.
Now, when you look at what you have there, and we talk about the difference between that and the lens that has us all fixed in, it's doing the same thing pretty much, because as I showed, you can tilt this side to side, and then of course you can tilt also the actual frame, so the front and the back of the lens are tilting very much like the front and the back of your camera.
True, and in my case, I've got separate controls to tilt it sort of forward and backwards and side to side. In that particular lens, most modern tilt shift lenses will have that rocking motion that you showed, but they'll also have an ability to rotate the lens on the camera, so that rocking motion can happen both horizontally or vertically, and you can choose exactly how that functions. So the same rocking motion can just be reoriented to function in a different way.
So now that you mention it, I look on
Yep.
the lens, and you can actually tilt it this way
rotate
as well.
it, yeah, exactly.
Rotate it. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, in this condition, I have the ability to control those completely independently. You do sacrifice that on modern lenses just by convenience and size and cost and all that. But the reason why this is mostly off the beaten path of photographers today is because it's unknown. Right? It's not the way that we see the world. And are you going to invest in some specific gear to explore something that you don't know if you're going to find a valuable, contribution to your photography with?
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I mean, there's so many different things we can do. This is yet another that can be confusing. It can be frustrating for people. People who haven't had the experience of using a camera like yours there may not have the even knowledge that this is an option that we can do. And plus, in this generation, I mean, it's all about editing, right? So you can Photoshop almost everything, can't you?
Well, you can, but it's an approximation. It's easy to tell when that sort of thing has been photoshopped versus the original, especially in certain conditions. If you do it in camera with like out of focus highlights, like light spots in the background that become out of focus, that bokeh in the background becomes phenomenally beautiful with the tilt shift lens, whereas if you do it in Photoshop, it just gets blurry.
Well, we're getting it a little bit more into that. I just want to zip over here to the Q&A for a quick second. Rachel apparently is now Spanish. Hola, ¿cómo está? Tammy Martino's watching. Hello, hello. And, of course, Andrew has to ask us the question, what about the cool Pentax lenses? Actually, Pentax does make some of these tilt-shift lenses as well. I just did a quick search. I found a couple options that you could look into, some different brands and so on. So that's something to think about. Jennifer Wolf, thank you for watching. Sheila, I don't think I said hello to you yet. And Jennifer has a question for us. She goes, how does a tilt-shift differ from just tilting the camera body?
Well, tilting the camera body, the greatest example for that, I think, Philip, you were mentioning it earlier, would be architecture, right?
Yes.
Do you want to fill us in?
Oh. So normally when you're shooting architecture, and I don't have an example of this as of right now, but I can probably dig one up on the internet very quickly, or someone else probably could. When you shoot architecture, you generally stand in one place. You tilt your camera up to take a picture of the building, and the building turns kind of pointy, even if it's a perfectly square skyscraper. So one of the advantages of tilt shift is you can kind of work against that, and you can keep everything properly kind of oriented in their proper shape.
Yeah.
And you'll see this
Here we
even
go.
if you've
So
ever
Gabriel
set
has
up a
some pictures.
projector, right? If you've ever set up a projector and you angle it in an upward position against the wall, then you'll notice that the image won't be rectangular, it will be trapezoidal in shape, which resembles a keystone in an ancient architecture that would hold sort of everything together, same shape. So we call it a keystoning effect. And if you want to remove that, then you can shift the lens in an upward motion so that you're capturing a different portion of the image circle. Usually tilt-shift lenses have a much wider image circle than a regular lens would. And so that can add two benefits to you. If you're using a tilt-shift lens as just a regular, plain old, fun lens, like manual focus landscape work, you don't really have to worry about any vignetting around the edges because the image circle is typically a bit bigger. Because you can shift that image circle up so that you could have the camera pointed flat. Shifting that up and down will allow you to get the proper framing that you want that you would have otherwise had to have gotten by rotating the camera in an upward or downward position.
Now, you bring up a good point, and that is manual focus. And I'm not sure if that goes for all tilt-shift lenses, but at least the ones that I've come across, and I'm probably walking into a corner here, but I think they're all manual focus, right?
You're right. They are all manual focus because focus is such a subjective thing. You're not dealing with a focal plane that moves forward and backward anymore. You've completely messed that up. So any autofocus mechanism, it won't have any idea what to do. So you can't really rely on those same metrics. But what you could do with these lenses is there's the hidden advantage. Since we're talking about the shifting mechanism, if you have the camera locked down on a tripod and you've got everything set up exactly the way that you want to take for a photograph, you can do a panorama without moving the camera. Because what you can do is you can shift the lens all the way onto one side and take a picture there and then shift it into the middle and then shift it off to the side, and you can do a static panorama using a tilt shift lens, which requires absolutely zero editing to put together. All you have to do is align the frames. You don't have to do any blending. They automatically fit perfectly because the optics, they match. It's a perfect fit. There's no difference between them.
Jennifer asks, what about the Lens Baby? Isn't the Lens Baby a highly marketed tilt-shift lens?
Yes and no. I mean, it functions along some of the same principles. If you could imagine the way that we're shifting the focal plane in a controlled sort of mechanism forward and backward, and then we could lift it up and down, the Lens Baby is kind of mounted on sort of a circular mount, and you could rotate it around that circle. So it gives you some similar control. And I mean, the cost is right. The Lens Babies, you can get some really, really cheap designs. You can find some of their initial designs used for almost nothing, too, if you just want to experiment with that. But it doesn't have the same, I don't know, it always just felt like a toy to me.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it had a legitimate quality to the precision that this kind of exploration would require in order for you to gain the most knowledge out of it. It's almost like you can make a lot of happy accidents with it, but
right.
I mean,
that's most of the feedback that I've heard about them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, Gabriel, you have the window open there in front of you. If you look at the one that's the accordion, it's about 2 pictures down from the one you have open right now. There you go. That's the way the Lens Baby first started, and you just basically had to hold it into place.
Right.
And then, of course, you can't reproduce the same photo twice because it just accordions back into a neutral position when you're done.
So if you take this, well, let's go with the new one.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Sony Lens Baby. So you take this, and then this is Canon or a Nikon one. First of all, the glass is a lot bigger and higher quality, and I would imagine that there's probably a lot more weatherproofing on the higher end ones as well, right? Because I mean, if you have a lens that you're tilting and shifting and moving back and forth, you want it to not be just sucking in dust and stuff the entire time.
I'm sure they're better engineered for that, although I don't know if they're weather sealed in the same way that a regular zoom lens would be. Because there's so many moving parts that interact with the exterior of the lens rather than most common lenses. Most of that stuff is designed interior. It's easier to weather seal a regular lens than it is a tilt shift lens. But I want to share an example image or two at this point, if that's all right.
I'd like to see that, but I'm just going to quickly touch on the weather-resistant part. If you look at the Nikon lenses in general, any of their higher lenses, they have a rubber O-ring seal on the bottom. If you look at the tilt shift, there is none of that. So I'm going to say that as far as weather sealing and weather resistance, I would say it's no better than anything else. But
right. Now,
to be fair, though, quality difference.
I've used my Canon MPE 65mm super macro lens to do all my snowflake work outdoors in like wet weather, freezing weather. It always comes in covered in snow and water and ice. It's not weather sealed, and I haven't had a problem with it.
And then there's that, yeah.
That's not to say that I won't the next time that I use it. You never know. But that lens, in similarity to the tilt shift lenses, does not have autofocus.
Mm-hmm.
It's got less electronics inside to potentially get gummed up by any issues with weather sealing. So there's that to think about as well. But just be cautious with your gear, no matter what scenario you're using it. I had somebody take a workshop with me. We went out photographing waterfalls, and it was a rainy day, and we took a lot of precautions. He was shooting with a 1D Mark IV, I think, and a 24 to 70 L lens, which is weather sealed, and water got in between the lens and the camera, and totally screwed things up. He had like $1,000 repair bill because that little gasket. You have to make sure that that's clean, right? You can't just mount it and hope that it works. If there's even a speck of dust on there, that's going to break the seal. Water's going to get in. But I'm squirreling here. I'm going off on a tangent.
Well, I think ultimately we just got to realize you're talking about $2,000 lenses, so treat them as such.
Well, yeah, sure. But Brian, what are the costs of those two lenses that you have there with you? They're not $2,000, are they? Oh,
they're just about that. Yeah, you're looking about $1,899 used, $2,100 new, kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
They're not inexpensive.
There are less expensive versions too. I think Canon has a 45mm tilt shift lens, and that comes down a little bit. It's not an L series lens in price, so the barrier to entry should it should be considerable to some. But again, because it's such a foreign concept, very few people have experimented with it. And the only times that I have has been when I've rented one and taken it for a test drive on some photo walks, which are the images I want to share.
Cool. That's probably a bit of the intimidation because, like, you buy a macro lens and you know that you can use that for doing extreme close-ups. Well, somewhat extreme, not Don Komarechka extreme close-ups, but extreme close-ups. But it's also one of the better portrait lenses out there, right? So it's like, if you fail,
you're hedging your bets. Exactly. It's got multiple uses. Where this one, well, I mean it's a manual focus, more landscape and atmospheric kind of lens, although some people have done some really nice portraits with it. The images that I'm showing you here were just basically test shots. So this is another photographer on a photo walk, I think 2 summers ago. Brian, I think you might have been maybe standing right next to me or somewhere nearby when I might have taken this picture. The point of this is I've got focus that runs all the way down from these, like the concrete down here in the foreground, all the way through the photographer, and then the birds and the clouds in the background behind him, they are sharp as well. But see how it falls off on the left and the right. So I've been able to tilt my focal plane so that it kind of passes through this vertical line. I don't remember the name of this photographer. I wish I did. It was taken in infrared as well, so I was really having a fun experimental take.
I think his name is Henry, actually, or is that just his bag?
I think that's just his bag. Henry's endowed us with some freebies that day.
So, cool.
Yeah, that was fun. Here's one more. This photographer you'll probably recognize, or at least some of us will, if it ever clears up and Lightroom cooperates. And come on. These images are like lying in cold storage on my computer, so it took
your hard
forever
drive's
to
spinning up right now.
Yeah, exactly. This is Sandra Parlow, who was here for this photo walk a few summers ago.
Nice.
And so you can see that, again, I've got a very narrow line of focus that kind of comes in through this way, but it's not parallel to the sensor. It's running in a very interesting kind of dynamic where I can make stuff fall off out of focus very, very nicely off on the sides that I wouldn't have normally been able to do if I was keeping things sort of straight and proper in that particular case.
And you can see in each of these cases, I mean, the focus when you have it is really sharp. You have a very clean image, and in my experience with lens babies, just to get back to that for a minute, you don't really get that very much. There's a very small part of the photo that's in focus, usually not any kind of straight line, and it's definitely not as sharp as I've seen these photos.
And the only time where I really started to get some creative ideas was at the very end of that day, and unfortunately I had to return that lens the next day. But this image here is the moonrise. So the moon is rising on the horizon, and this is kind of an abstract shot where it's completely overexposed and everything, but what you'll notice in this particular image is that I have the reflection of the moon running all the way forward and backward, completely sharp in focus, all the way right down here it's completely sharp, and then as I get up to the horizon, it's completely sharp along there as well, and you'll notice that it falls off and becomes out of focus along the sides, which is kind of an interesting thing. This image was shot at f4. right? So to have front-to-back focus at f4 would not be possible unless you're doing something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, for the people that are looking at this and going, oh, well, they have that filter in Instagram, I can just do it that way. Like Don was saying earlier, yeah, you can blur the background in Photoshop and try and get a bit of that bokeh effect, but it's never going to give you the same control and the same creaminess and the same the same in-camera look that you get with an actual tilt-shift lens.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And one of the things that I haven't experimented with, I had the idea right after I took this image, but had to rush home, was to do some street photography at night with this particular lens.
Ooh,
to
that'd
have
be cool.
like a running line going through the frame of some interesting repeating stuff, whether it be street lights or fence posts or whatever it happens to be, and have everything out of focus on either side. But in that scenario, the out of focus points will be out of focus light points, which depending on what my aperture is set to, will become very geometric and quite beautiful within that construct. And you can't replicate that in post-processing. There's just no way to do it. So it's one of those things where it's on my buying list. The next lens that I buy, if I'm to buy one, will push my photography into a new area. And I've already explored fisheyes and macro and all sorts of stuff. So the next big one for me to bite the bullet and buy is going to be a tilt-shift lens. And so, I'm looking at what's available on the market, and I'm thinking, even like I've got a 24mm f1.4 lens. I might even like trade that in, like sell that off, and then get a tilt shift lens in exchange. Because while that lens is very useful for me for doing some low light stuff, it's still in the same vein of photography as everything else that I do. Whereas a 24mm, I think the Canon one is f3.5, so it's not quite as wide, but that doesn't matter because the ability to explore with a lens like that is so much more effective than I can with the very, very good f1.4 24mm lens that I currently own. And the cost is maybe a couple of $100 difference. So, yeah, f3.5. Yeah, there you go. The beauty of the lens.
Yeah, it is very nice, very nice. Jen, just want to quickly answer your questions in the Q&A here. Are all tilt-shift lenses primes, or are there some zooms? I believe they're all primes.
They are all primes, yep.
And
that would probably be a few too many mechanisms to get going. Having the lens able to rotate and shift on two axes and then also zoom, that's probably just a little bit too much movement.
Yeah, I would agree. She also asks, when you use a tilt-shift lens, can you see where the in-focus part of it, of the photo where you'll be shooting it, or is it a wild guess?
You see it right in the viewfinder, or on the live view screen, whichever you're doing. So what you see as far as focus, whenever you're taking an image, in most scenarios, the aperture blades of the camera are completely wide open, and they snap down to whatever the set aperture is when you take the picture, and then they snap back open again. That's how so much light comes in, so the viewfinder looks bright. In the tilt shift scenario, that is still true. So you will be able to see that focus kind of fall off towards the edges. It might be a little bit more effective if you're using live view, and you can zoom in and really critically see that. If you're not used to where this change is occurring and exactly how it's going to occur. And in my experience, I sat down with the camera on a tripod and I just tinkered with it for about an hour and a half. Just playing around with how that focal plane, like what actual physical adjustment I make to the lens results in what kind of focus feedback in the camera, like how the two interact with one another. And I would say that probably a good couple of days of solid use would be useful with live view and the viewfinder in a hybrid sense. And then once you can predict sort of where things are going to fall, then you can use the viewfinder just fine.
Yeah, it's a fun lens to use, but obviously it's not for everything. So what are some specific examples that you think tilt shift is best used for? And we've already talked briefly about architecture, straightening out a building, but they're also really cool for making that miniature effect.
Yeah, well, I was going to say something completely unrelated to a tilt shift lens is the optics or the optical phenomenon that is created with macro photography. So I'll describe that and then show how it relates to the tilt shift tech here. Because in macro photography, the closer you get to your subject, you have an inherently shallower depth of field. That is my daily nightmare with the snowflake work that I'm editing these days. And so when you get close and close to something small, that that tilt shift, the macro effect makes the focus on either side of where the focal plane is very, very shallow. Now you can mimic this using a tilt shift lens. So you have the ability to make, say, the top and the bottom less in focus and have the focus run completely through the side, which gives the exact same visual trickery effect of a macro shot. So it makes it look like that scene was far smaller than it actually is, based on your relation of looking to macro photographs that would normally have a shallow depth of field. So if you had a tiny diorama of Grand Central Station and you took a picture of that, and then you took a tilt shift picture of the actual Grand Central Station, they would look roughly the same, depending on your skills of making a diorama.
I was just about to say. Apparently, I've been challenged now. I'm supposed to use one of these lenses to go take some pictures of Dixie, where her eyes and nose are both in focus. Now, that's going to be a little difficult because the narrowness of it, I mean, 2 eyes and nose, that kind of a space would be a lot harder to try and capture, but I could certainly give it a try.
Think of it in two dimensions, because if you think of her nose being maybe this much far forward than her eyes, right? But her eyes are maybe about that far apart, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not saving yourself any distance as far as the focal plane is concerned by doing that. Now, you'll just have to shoot down with a smaller aperture, and just as you would when things were sort of normally forward and back. But it's that distance being roughly equal between the distance between her eyes and the distance in depth between her nose and her eyes are pretty similar. So it'll be a fun exercise, but I don't know
if she's willing. If she's willing.
Yeah, plus she's got to stay still, plus, she hates you. So she'll attack you a lot.
Well, she doesn't hate me, she's just crazy. That's the big difference.
Well, you'd still make some interesting pictures. You might get like her claw in focus. And
that would be cool.
There you go.
As she's swiping at you.
Yeah, with everything off on the sides, completely out of focus. You could just make sure that she's angry enough to cooperate. And is she declawed?
Oh, no. Not
oh, that'll be fun then.
Yes, it's a very entertaining cat. So, okay, then we've talked about briefly editing. Like, editing is something that everybody does now. What kind of software does something similar to what a lens or a tilt shift lens can do?
Well, I mean, the fundamental way, I'm sure that there are software tools to do exactly this, but in Photoshop, what I would do, and just this kind of gives the underlying effect of what happens here, is I would take my image in Photoshop and I would create a duplicate layer of it. And with that second layer, I can blur it. I can use any of the blurring tools. I like the Gaussian blur in Photoshop. It's a nice filter. And get it acceptably blurry on the edges and wherever I want it to be. And then using a layer mask and using a gradient in Photoshop. The gradient tool has the ability to create kind of a line that fades off on the sides. And so that is a very good way for then you can approximate, do you want to have a vertical line of focus running straight through? Do you want to have it horizontal and have the top and bottom out of focus? And using that adjustment layer, you can make the blurry image come in on those edges that you want to have faded off. And that is sort of the quintessential way using Photoshop and understanding what exactly is happening to create the effect. Now, there's a lot of tools out there. I know some cameras even have a miniature effect built right into them. That you can do that even before you've left the camera. And that's all it's doing, is it's artificially blurring based on some sort of gradient. Usually, if it's in camera, it's going to be the top and the bottom.
It's funny, in research for this show, I looked all over the place online. I tried to get some photos. I have a photo of Robert that I'll share in a few seconds. But one of the articles I found was from the photography blog where he says why you don't need a tilt shift lens. And of course, the big argument is cost. Why would we want to spend between $1,200 and $2,500 when we can do all this crazy stuff editing? And then that goes on to go into a very interesting way to create a tilt shift by using panoramas and changing your perspective on panoramas and so on. So, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can kind of play with it, but again, it's not giving you...
Here's the biggest difference, and it has nothing to do with how closely you can achieve the same effect. It has to do with creativity. right? You're most creative before you've pressed the shutter button or immediately during that action, right? After the fact, creativity is stifled because the creative opportunities are far less than they would have been in camera. So if you can sit there in camera and get the image as close to what you want as possible, you'll probably, while you're adjusting the camera and setting things up, you'll probably get an idea. And that idea, hopefully, will end up being a creative one, and that might fail, it might succeed, but that's where creativity happens. Creativity in editing, yes, that's possible, but it's not as powerful as creativity in camera. Any photographer would always say that's true. And so being able to experience this, see it right through the viewfinder, make the adjustments on the fly, get a creative idea, execute that in the field, and learn. You don't learn as much from post-processing than you do when you're actually looking through your camera. So there's a lot of things to be said for actually owning one of these lenses. But I'm hypocritical because I don't own one.
Well, none of us do. And I think the reason why I wanted to do the show in the first place was because nobody owns them. They're not really popular to sell, but everybody loves the look of them. So I thought if we did a show, we've opened up a few eyes as to what makes them so unique and why they're such an interesting tool to have. Sorry,
Bryan,
Gabe,
I'm going to make a commitment to you right now.
Yes.
This year I will buy a tilt shift lens.
Oh, very cool.
So at some point
From
in
Bryan.
maybe. It depends if he's got exactly what I want in stock at a price that works. But that, well, see, the thing about me, Bryan, is that is version 1 of that lens. And
yes.
Version 2 that's now out. And so
these are both used copies. So
yes, exactly.
They're the older generation.
But and that being said, an old version of an L lens is still an exceptional quality lens.
Yeah, sure.
And
absolutely.
the newer version, even when used, you'll probably be adding a significant percentage onto the cost too, right?
But ultimately, if you're going to spend the money once, you might as well get the latest and greatest, right?
Well, I mean, it's a business expense for me, so sure.
Okay, now
I'd say oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off again, but Sheila asked if she said she'd love to see a short tutorial on what Don just said, but because of the lag, I'm never really sure exactly what you mean. So Sheila, if you can just kind of retype that question with what we were talking about at the time, and then I'll make a note of that so we can definitely get into that. Sorry, Gabriel, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other, like Don made a good point that one of the benefits of having the lens is creativity. The other one is time. Like if you are doing architecture for a living or maybe real estate photography or something like that, and yeah, sure, you can take a bunch of panoramics and mess around with them, or you can take a photo in Lightroom and do the lens correct thing where it distorts the photo to look like it's normal. But if I'm doing a lot of photography like that, where I find that I'm moving pictures around and warping them and stuff, I'm just going to go out and buy the lens because my time is worth more to me than fiddling around in Photoshop and Lightroom.
I completely agree. And you know what I was talking about being more creative in the field? I kind of put myself in that scenario with some and other ideas just kind of bombarded that idea, and I have come up with a wonderful idea that I don't think any photographer has done before. Are you ready for this? So take a street scene, maybe something that has some really nice out of focus bokeh, and do a tilt shift shot with the plane of focus vertical. Right? So, the plane of focus is tilted, but it appears like you've got a vertical line of focus. And then hopefully nothing changes in the scene, or maybe something does. Maybe it'll be interesting that way. And shift it so that the focus is running horizontally through the frame. Take those two photographs and focus stack them.
That could be really cool.
Yeah, so then it's like the corners become out of focus, but in a natural bokeh kind of way that's created mostly in camera, with the focus stacking being the only Photoshop combination.
See, that's when it gets cool, when you start combining the techniques that you use on your snowflake photos and rolling that into a new lens and a new way of thinking. This is where that creativity is sparked from,
I call this the puzzle piece approach in photography, where, the more you learn about photography, it doesn't matter how obscure and unrelated you think things are when you learn them, eventually you will find some way to connect those puzzle pieces in a way that sparks a creative idea.
Absolutely. Phil, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I want to tie back to buying stuff. I like buying things. Buying things is good. However, and we fall into this category with some of the stuff that we end up talking about, and there are some really cool photography, like some really cool gear out there. But it's gear that you might use, once or twice, and it might live in your camera bag for the rest of the year. So, and you actually brought up a good point earlier about renting. And I just spent a couple minutes poking around, and the place that I like to rent my lenses from doesn't appear to have a lens, have a tilt shift lens. But there's other places that you can actually rent a tilt shift lens from, and it's really reasonable, it seems, for a decent period of time. And so you can rent a lens, play around with it for a week, plan out some shots you want to do with it, take the first 2 days of the week, play around with it, get comfortable with it, go out, try doing your pictures, and come back for probably less than $130, as opposed
That's
to
a great
$2,000
idea
for buying a lens.
Now, there's one problem to that. That's a great idea when you want initial experience with that. In order to gain knowledge and to understand if it's maybe for you. But you will not make your best images with that. Your best images will come out of the blue randomly when you didn't expect that lens was going to be useful and it's in your bag. And so that's when your best work is going to be created, which means you have to own it. You can't predict when that moment is going to happen.
Absolutely.
At least that logic stands true for me and my fisheye lens. I mean, it's a smaller lens. It's always in the bag. It doesn't come out often, but when it does, unpredictably, it can make a magical shot where one might not have been possible. And I think a tilt shift kind of fits that same role. I've had that initial experience through renting, and that has been enough for me to know that it is on my purchasing list moving forward. So yeah, the logic kind of works both ways there.
And I do agree. I think it's a good kind of expansion of that, and that is, it's great to kind of test out. But if you decide you like it, then you probably want to purchase it.
Right.
And
actually, Jen has
I'll give you that with the fisheye lens, because we were down a couple years ago. Actually, Martin and I were down in Costa Rica, and I had a 14 mil Canon. Yeah, it was Canon at the time. A 14 mil Canon, just super wide, and I didn't know what I would use it for. Terribly a lot, and then there ended up being a sloth crawling across the ground, and so I shot a picture, and my hard drive's not hooked up, so I can't find the picture, but I shot a picture on the ground in front of the sloth where it looks like it's like this massive, monster of a sloth, but it's just because it was a super wide-angle lens that I, as you said, happened to have in a situation where I would not have used it.
This is why I bring the kitchen sink with me everywhere. My back hates me for it. But you never know when that one obscure piece of gear is going to be the ticket to success, right?
Phil, for you, Jen has a question. She says, where do you usually rent your gear? Not Henry's? Gasp.
Well, I do usually like to get my stuff from Henry's. It was great because I used to be able to ship it to a store and pick it up from a store, and it made it really easy. But they don't look like they have a tilt shift lens anymore. They rearranged their... Oh, there it is. Okay, never mind. They do have it. That's awesome. Okay, so it's $195 for a week?
You got it.
Wow, that's not bad.
Or $65 for a day. Now, I'm not sure if they still do it. I'll admit it's been a while since I rented a lens from Henry's. And yeah, they got they have one for Nikon as well. It's awesome.
There you go.
They have a
macro.
No, I've heard of some other people doing some interesting stuff with sort of making their own tilt shift lenses too. And so one of the things that you can do, and I haven't really looked into this to any great degree, I should have done some more prep before the show, but I'm just remembering it now, is one of the main things that a tilt shift lens needs, like I had mentioned earlier, is a larger image circle. Because of the way that that circle gets bent and twisted around the sensor, you need to have a larger one for it to work properly. So why don't you take a medium format lens? And with an adapter on a medium format lens, you could then take the larger image circle that a medium format lens creates and be able to shift that into the angles that you need. There might be an adapter out there that does exactly that. I'm not sure. Maybe you've got to make your own.
They do exist.
They do exist. And like I own an old Mamiya, I think it's a 90 millimeter lens. And it's an interesting lens. You can get a 90 millimeter tilt shift for the Canon, but with that adapter, I might already have one. And medium format lenses have existed for a long time, and while some of them are ridiculously expensive, some of them are pretty cheap too. So you can just hunt through some bargain bins or like look on eBay for something that's sort of half broken, half working, because to be honest, you don't really need anything that is in pristine condition, at least when it comes to photographic experimentation.
Mhm.
And to be honest, that might be the better way to go, depending on cost. Because if it costs you $200 to rent a lens, but some of that gear might cost you $300, and then you've got it, well, you'll also get more photographic experience and knowledge in the process, because now you're being somewhat inventive and you're understanding what's happening with light a little bit better than buying something ready-made.
Is it just me, or is Don Komarechka the photography equivalent of the island of Dr. Moreau? Let's take this and put it together with this. You have.
I'll take that as a compliment.
As it was intended.
Sheila, what she asked about before, what she would want to see a session on, would be the edit process, basically, to create the look that you were talking about, the Gaussian. I always said Gaussian blur. What did you call it?
I said Gaussian blur, but I have no idea.
I don't know. I don't know the real word.
Are we getting into another GIF and GIF comment?
Yes, GIF and GIF.
No, so there's no debate about that.
One's peanut butter and one's a moving picture.
All right. Mark says that he rented a wide-angle lens in the fall from Henry's for his trip to Nova Scotia. It was awesome. So glad he did it. And I think what Henry's used to do before, we used to own a company called Headshots Rentals. And when you'd rent something, you get a certain percentage of that rental back, the cost of the rental back, if you wanted to buy it. So unfortunately, it was pretty cool. Unfortunately, they stopped that program though when Headshots disappeared. So that would be nice to have some, rent it for a while, try it out.
It was murdered.
Yeah, it was murdered.
Well, it was more absorbed into Henry's brand.
Yeah. All right. So tilt shift is a lot of fun. What kind of person would you recommend a tilt shift lens to?
Everyone. No, I'm
Healthy.
kidding.
Healthy people.
Wealthy.
Oh, wealthy people.
Yes, for $2,000, we'll call it wealthy.
I would say, who would you recommend it to? Somebody that likes to experiment. If you are set in your ways and you know exactly what you want out of photography and the current gear that you have is giving you that, then you don't need a tilt shift lens. However,
I think that applies to everything camera-wise.
Yeah, if you are lusting over the latest and greatest camera body because it's an upgrade on the one that you currently have, stop. It's a really hard thing to do, and again, I'm a hypocrite with this because Canon's about to announce the successor to the 1DX, and I'm going to be all over that.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea here is an incremental improvement in the quality of your images is not equal to a much larger increase in the creativity of your images. And so if you can pursue the creative approach at the same cost, then that should always be the choice that you make. Yes, you're kind of stepping outside of your safety zone. You're kind of stepping outside of your bubble and thinking outside the box, but that's where the best images are made.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would probably go out on a limb and just say anybody who's really heavy into architecture might want to consider it as well.
Or real estate photography as well, yeah.
Real estate, yeah.
Or abstract.
Or if you find yourself shooting a lot of panoramas. I know some professional photographers that they increase the resolution of their camera effectively by doing some slight panorama shots. Instead of cropping off the top and the bottom afterwards, they get the framing sort of where they want, but they want to have a little bit more on the edge. They shift the lens into that zone, they take a second shot, and now their 24 megapixel camera becomes a 30 megapixel camera. And they can play more with that afterwards too.
Now, I never thought about using a tilt shift as a portrait lens before. However, I recently was hanging out with my buddy Robert, and I made this shot here. And it's not a dramatic tilt shift effect, but if you notice the shoulders are softer than the center. The candle's really nice and in focus, and so are like his eyes up in here. Or I guess I should show you back up in here. I'm putting my mouse on
his eyes are up there, Brian.
Yeah, I had my mouse on the hangout window. Anyway, being able to control where your focus is makes things very fun. I really enjoyed using it, and that's an 85 millimeter lens, which lends very well to a portrait focal length.
And in that scenario too, could you imagine, say, having a bride and groom in a wedding, and you've got sort of the aisle and maybe flower petals down the aisle, and all of those flower petals leading down the aisle are all in focus, and the bride and the groom at the end are perfectly sharp, but all of the audience on the side fades off gracefully. Right? You know, there's a lot of uses where somebody could find a great creative approach.
Well, I hope that through this show, people are getting some ideas and considering getting into trying some of these fun things. One of the things I love to do these days, you know, there's a lot of photography opportunities in my world, and one of the things I love to do is just grab something I've never used before and just muck around with it to see what it can do, what I can do with it. And that's the beauty of being able to try some things like this out. Again, focal length has a lot to do with what you're shooting. So if you're doing landscapes, you're going for the wider varieties. If you're shooting portraits, you're going for the longer, the more telephoto range varieties. And like you said, Don, there's a 45 millimeter, there's this 24 millimeter, there's a 17 millimeter, all from Canon.
I think Canon also makes a 90 millimeter as well.
That's awesome. There's a portrait focal length for you, right? From Nikon, you have a lot of different selections as well. So, you know, it's not a bad idea to maybe rent some of these for a weekend if you know that you're going to have some friends over, if you're going to take a walk in Toronto, or if you're going to vacation in a place with lots of architecture like Spain or Italy or something like that, where you want to really make that architecture have a different feel than any photos you've seen. A tilt shift is a solid choice for that. Now, you mentioned diorama before, Don.
Yeah.
This is something that I would love. I love the effect. If you're up at the Skylon Tower in Niagara Falls and you're using one of these wide tilt shifts, and could you imagine the miniature kind of look you can get from the street below?
The trick with that is you would have to have a nice detailed cloud overlay in the sky, and that might not even work. Usually the strongest miniature effect images are where the architecture or something in the near foreground extends to the top of the frame. Because if you could think about it, if you have just a blue sky that's out of focus at the top of the frame, well, then having that in focus makes no difference, right? So part of the effect might be diminished in that construct. But if you're at the top of the Skylon Tower and they're doing their fireworks display, and the fireworks are coming into the top of the frame and they're appearing out of focus, now you've got something interesting, right?
Very good. This is why we have you on the show.
This isn't the best example of shooting from the top of the Skylon Tower. I want to call it the Cylon Tower, you know? Anyway. So this would be not a great example, shot on an Nikon, but of the miniature-ish effect without using a tilt shift. But you mentioned silence again. Skylon Tower.
Wow, that is difficult for you.
Thought I'd bring it up, but
if,
as you
if
said,
only the lights on the falls were on, though, that would
it
have
would
been
be a lot nicer. Now I do have an alternate one. Let me pull that up in a second here. Not the greatest. I'll give you that.
You're really selling your work here.
I always do.
I'm sold.
Is it this one? Yeah, it's this one. This one maybe works a little bit better because it has the building in the top of it. But a little bit more of that miniature-ish effect. And this is would be done after the fact. And after the fact, because I had a picture I didn't like in the first place. But
yeah, so that is very similar to that miniature effect. The issue, though, that breaks it is the casino sign. Because it is far forward in the image, where it is the same level of focus, where the miniature effect would work better if the word casino was out of focus. Because then it would show that shallow depth of field effect only hitting that narrow slice in the background and not hitting other areas that would come through the effect, which would include this building breaking through that line in the foreground. But no, it shows you sort of how one can get the most out of that kind of effect. Now that's approximated, right, Philip? That wasn't an actual...
that was. I think we shot that in like 2008, if that. So we're on there on like one of the first Niagara trips.
Right. In that image, if you had it like authentically done, then you had a lot of sort of specular highlights, like light points that were in the out of focus range. Depending on the apertures that you choose, and how far you tilt things around, then you could make those into like starbursts as they kind of and whatever aperture pattern, of course, however many blades in your aperture would affect the geometry of what's created out of focus, and that would be so much nicer than the Photoshop equivalent. And I just wanted to reiterate that the Photoshop process in some cases can look almost identical, but when there is a difference, man, that tilt shift lens will shine.
And that's a great example, because in that picture, that building throws it off. Whereas if it was an actual tilt shift lens,
actually, if it was an actual tilt shift lens, that building would still be in focus along that plane. We're talking more about what would make a realistic diorama effect versus what is the effect of the film plane shifting. So that the word casino would still be in focus in a tilt shift lens, because it would be falling through that same band across the image.
Even though it's so much farther forward?
That's right. It doesn't matter if it was just about in front of the camera; it would still be in focus.
Okay.
Oh, so many fun
tilt shift lenses.
I hear a road trip in the works, eh?
I think so. I think we got to go back down there.
Yeah, while we still have these used lenses in stock, we should take a road trip down to Norway.
One for each of us. It's perfect.
There you go. All right, so guys, thank you so much for being on. I think we've covered a lot of what a tilt shift could do. If anybody has any questions in the meantime, please feel free. We're going to say our goodbyes in just a second, but feel free to write your comments in the Q&A now if you have any other questions you'd like us to answer, or even after the fact. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please post a comment below the show. Again, remember to click like. Let us know that you enjoy what we're talking about, and share the videos with your friends. Tell everybody. I mean, we have a pretty decent back history of episodes where we've covered a lot of different topics. Going forward into the future, obviously next week is going to be our banter show. Should be a lot of fun. Our first one, we're going to have a lot to talk about. We made a whole list of different things last week that we were going to get into, some of which meant absolutely nothing, and some we might actually talk about. So it could be a lot of fun. I really hope people tune in. Andrew, good. I'm glad that you found the show informative. Thanks for watching tonight. And everybody, Don, thank you so much again for being on this week, man.
You're welcome, Brian. It's fun to talk about these things, and I just want to share something that I've been working on real quick before we end off, something that has been kind of fun to play with in the last little while, and that some of your viewers might have some fun playing with if we get weather cold enough again to do this. Around minus 10 and colder, minus 20 being about the cutoff, so in those temperatures, playing around with freezing soap bubbles is a lot of fun. And this is just backlit by a flashlight with a colored filter, and that's one image. This is a separate image that's slightly further away that I've been really happy with. So I plan on actually writing an ebook on this subject that will be out in time for next winter with the material that I've been able to gather in the last little while. So that's one of the things on my docket. And just for fun, I started working on the snowflake that I will be posting tomorrow. For those that don't know, I share one snowflake every single day for 100 days through the winter, and it just about kills me every year. This is the initial focus stack. It's a zoomed-in view sort of the center of what will happen for tomorrow. There's some alignment issues, and I've got to go through all the individual layers and correct a lot of stuff. Color and brightness and sharpness and all of these things still have yet to be done. There's still about 5 hours, I think, on this one because it's really complex. But
so you still have a long night ahead of you.
Well, no, I mean, I'll be doing this one at least before midnight tomorrow. It'll be done. So
I see.
That's going to be my task.
And I've heard rumors
so
that this will probably be your last year doing this.
Well, those rumors are substantiated, if only because my lovely wife is pregnant, and we are expecting a baby girl, and that will be coming in June. So
awesome.
Life after that will be wonderfully chaotic in a different kind of way, and so I don't know if I'll have the same time next winter to do this the same project. So I'm making the most out of it this year, that's for sure.
Well, I certainly think you've made the most out of it in total. I mean, you wrote the book on snowflake photography. You have so many. You've made the poster now, which is absolutely incredible. All your snowflakes to scale. Good on you, man. Congratulations for everything you've done and for your upcoming baby. Sheila says, Don, congrats to you and your wife, which is really nice. And I can't wait to see what you've got coming out next. Gab, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, okay then. All right. Well, while we're saying our goodnights, Don, why don't you quickly let the world know how to find you?
All right. Well, doncom.ca is where you'll find most of my work, my portfolio of stuff. But if you're curious about the snowflake and the winter stuff that I do, head on over to skycrystals.ca, and you'll find the poster print and the book and lots of other stuff. And you know, if you've got any questions about the kind of stuff that we talk about, whether it's tilt shift lenses or any of the macro craziness that I do, I'm always open to chat about it. So feel free to get in touch.
Excellent. Gabriel, where can people get a hold of you? You've got your wedding photography. You've done bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah photography that you've gotten quite busy with.
Yeah, corporate headshots. Like we're thinking about running a special for people that want to get their LinkedIn or Facebook profile pictures. Usually LinkedIn, doing some quick portraits that way. Yeah, weddings, special events, and also my wife's newborn photography, which is going very well for her. I'm just working on getting her website up and running and everything. So you can contact me at Gabriel@BousquetPhotography.ca.
And maybe, around June, July, you'll be getting a phone call from Don for Trish.
Hey, there you go.
See what I did there? Hey,
a little synergy.
That's right. There you go. And Phil,
that would be probably the most intimidated she would ever be.
Oh, I would just keep watching. I wouldn't even blink. And so that would just be totally scary for any other photographer in that scenario. So maybe I'll hold off on that call.
And Phil, you're still teaching at the Henry's Learning Lab out in the Oshawa Way?
I am. Took January off through scheduling error, and I'll be back there for February.
Excellent. So if anybody wants to take any classes from Mr. Phil, you can definitely register yourselves for some classes out in the Oshawa Henry's.
The Saturday class, it'll be me. If it's not a Saturday class, like if it's a Tuesday at like 4 o'clock for some reason, or 10:30, probably won't be me. But Saturdays, it'll most likely be me.
Very good. Well, hopefully people...
And speaking of classes too, Brian, I don't want to cut off Phil, but I remind everybody at the end what we're doing too.
Well, sure. I mean, we have quite a few things, hopefully more things in the future. We have July, 2 Sundays in July. We have the Don, well, at least one so far. Don and I are running his macro session again. The master class is going to be with Don, and we're going to be up at your place. We're going to be doing a lot of the same stuff we did before, but with a completely different twist. You're going to be getting into something a lot more interesting as well this time.
Well, we last time we never touched on, well, I mean, some people out in the field might have experimented with this, but we never did it in studio, to play with water droplet refraction photography. And we're going to build some lessons and some demos. We're going to have all the right pieces in order to make that happen. And so everybody is going to have sort of the knowledge, tools, and experience to take that and kind of kick their macro photography up a few notches, because that's the kind of stuff that even now in January you can do and make wonderful water droplet refraction images on your kitchen table. You don't need to have a beautiful garden to do it. So we'll have that aspect, and I'm sure we'll have some other twists and turns that are fun to play with as well.
My favorite stuff, light painting, where you can just set up a little table in your room, stuff like that, where you can set up a little scenario in your house at any time. That's the best stuff to shoot, because there's never an excuse not to do it.
Exactly.
And that will be on July the 10th. So that'll be the first one. And that, by the way, is already up on the Daytripper Photo website if anybody wants to register. I'm shocked it's not sold out already. Shocked.
But, well, it's because it's the middle of the winter time, right? Last time when we announced it and had those things started, I think it was people were getting the spring itch already.
It's true. It's true.
Right.
So get in there while you can, guys, before it is sold out. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for being here. I didn't have to gong anybody tonight. That was fantastic. And it's been a fun show. So we're going to say goodnight now, everybody, and I hope you all have a great time this week. And don't forget, the Furry Family Challenge is still ongoing. There's 2 more weeks that you can make your photos for Furry Family and post that to the Daytripper Photo community. Thank you all so much, and have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Take care.